These chosen ones, the gun is good. Go forth and kill.
You came here in the stone head.
I don't know.
It is the only path and passage into the vortex. You will show me how you come to be here. Tell me everything.
My name is Zed. For Zardoz, I am an exterminator. Caution, caution, you are approaching the
Look into the ring.
took a woman in his name, Zardoz.
Zardoz!
Tabernacle is indestructible and everlasting.
Well, this is a film that you could only make after making a big hit, which was Deliverance. So because it was such a huge success, it gave me the ability to make a rather strange film. The origin of it was that, I'd noticed then, and this was 1973, and I'd noticed it much more since, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and that the rich have access to better medicine and they tend to live longer. So I projected that into the future, where I could imagine that the elite could extend their lives to the point where they could achieve immortality, whilst the rest of the world rather declined into a kind of new primitivism. And so I just projected that forward to see what a community of people who were going to achieve immortality, how they would behave, and how the rest of the world would fall into decline. And so that was the origins of the story. And then I sat down and started to write it. And of course, inevitably, it became rather philosophical, because if these people achieved immortality, clearly there was no purpose, no point in having children, because that would just swell their numbers, which with their limited resources. And since they were going to live forever, they had to come to terms with a world without children. Then extrapolating from that, would the sexual urge survive those kind of conditions? And then taking it a step further, I question this whole notion of sleep. No one quite knows why we sleep. But when these patterns of life and death were broken, I suggested that they would also cease to need to sleep. And in the vortex, therefore, of these people cocooned in this society of the immortals, how they would react, how people would react to this, to immortality and to that kind of life. And so you see that this society is gradually divided up into really three types. There's the immortals who are dealing with that process. And then there are the apathetics. They are people who found immortality impossible to endure. And the third category were those who rebelled against the whole notion of immortality and had to be disciplined. And within the society, which was entirely democratic, everything was voted on all the time, continuously. And so that when transgressions occurred, people were punished by aging. So that was the basis of the story. I worked for a time for the BBC in Bristol, and my children went to a nursery school run by Bill Stair's wife, and that's how I met him. He was an artist and an art teacher, and we got on tremendously well. Bill was very neurotic and paranoid, and all those wonderful things, but he's had an extraordinary mind, and I loved him, and I took him. When I went to Hollywood to make Point Blank, I took him with me because Point Blank was my first color film. I sort of had a kind of theory of color, and I brought Bill over, and Bill supervised the color of that film. I shot each scene in one color, so that it was actually monochromatic, and Bill kind of policed that right the way through, and then from then on we would toss ideas around, and out of it came. Well, we first of all, the first film we really did together was Leo the Last, that he wrote with me, and then Zardoz. He's dead now, I'm afraid, but he was very funny and also had great penetration in his mind, and I asked him to help me with this project, and we worked on it together. He particularly worked on the visual aspects of it, in suggesting how this vortex would look. And he worked closely with Tony Pratt, who was the designer. And so the script went through several drafts. I can hardly remember what we left out, what transpired. I mean, I think in the editing, I did quite a lot of changes. I intended it to be mysterious, really, and not for it to be too explained. But in the editing process, I felt it was perhaps too obscure, and made put some explanations in. But the concept really, from the beginning, followed that line that I've described. I tell you what inspired me more than anything was Aldous Huxley's book, After Many a Summer, which is about a rich man who is determined to prolong his life and takes all sorts of devices to accomplish that. And eventually he starts to kind of, he's physically starts to turn into an ape. It's like he goes back into his history, and I thought that was that I loved that book, and I suppose that was one of the things that inspired me. It was very, very difficult to get it financed, even though I had just made a hit, because people didn't understand it. The studios didn't understand it at all. And eventually 20th Century Fox decided to do it because they had new management, more adventurous perhaps than the other studios at that point. But still, the philosophical issues were, people didn't follow, I don't think, really. And a lot of people didn't anyway. And they found the film obscure. To my mind, it was simple enough, but perhaps I didn't make it clear enough. But certainly, a lot of people found it perplexing. I always conceived it as an area of land which was defended by a kind of invisible wall that the outside world, the brutals from the outside, could not penetrate. And that then, of course, the name Zardoz derives from the Wizard of Oz. And this, Sean Connery, who plays the brutal who finally breaks into the vortex, he discovers how they've been manipulated by this stone head, which is a god-like. My idea was that it was rather based on the idea of the Wizard of Oz, where the wizard is just this little old man, but he's got a huge voice and scary voice, and that's what Arthur Frayne devises, this system of controlling the outlands by having them a god to worship, which is how much of the world, much of history, people have been constrained and ruled and obeyed various gods who've been presented to them. So this was the sort of the satirical element in the story, was a kind of satire on religion. When the film opened in France, the communist newspaper asked me to go to their office, and they were very nervous and agitated. There was their critic and one or two others and the editor of the paper, and they said they wanted to review it, give it a good review, but they were concerned that I had based the flying head on Karl Marx, and that it was I was making fun of Karl Marx with this head, and that had absolutely never occurred to me. The sculptor who made the head based it on me. I sat there for him and he cast it, and it was based on my face, not Karl Marx at all. So they obliged me to sign a letter pledging that it was not based on Karl Marx, and because they felt that if they gave it a good review and then afterwards I said I was making fun of Karl Marx, they would look stupid. So that was how that came about. I cast Narbuggy because I've admired him as an actor, and that's why I chose him. And the idea that he's was rather young was important, because again he was an immortal, so he could be any age really, and he hadn't been aged by misdemeanors, And so he looked very young, and he was perhaps, who knows, 200 years old, perhaps. To play the lead, to play Zed, I needed a powerful, somewhat a physically powerful person, and also an actor who could exude a certain intelligence. Sean Connery had been doing Bond, and he finished doing Bond, and he was finding it difficult to get cast because he was so associated with Bond that people didn't really resisted him as casting him in other roles. On the other hand, I found it almost a perfect casting for me because, first of all, he had the magnificent physique, and also he's a very highly intelligent man, which you could see in his eyes and his face. When he came over, and in this house here where I live, and he stayed in the house while we were preparing the film. And he's a marvelous raconteur. He's a wonderful guest. It was a pleasure to have him in the house, and we ate dinner every night, and we drank a bottle of wine or two. Sean understood this piece. It's interesting that none of the actors that I cast in the film ever really questioned it. The only thing that Sean was concerned about was his name. So, the Americans say Z, and we say Z. So, and he said, "What is my name? Is it Z or is it Z?" I said, "No, it's Z." So, otherwise, actors are so instinctive and imaginative that they never ask those, or very rarely do they ask these fundamental questions like, what is this film for? What is it saying? They enter it, and they just depended on me to look after them and support them, and it was a very joyful shoot. I staged it here in the Wicklow Hills where I live, which is itself a kind of magical place. And it's also, here I'm surrounded by trees, of marvelous trees, many of which I've planted. And not only an hour away is a major city, Dublin. And but whilst you're here, you couldn't imagine that you were that close to a city. And so this, in a way, is a kind of vortex in itself. And perhaps living here is what probably inspired the idea. I don't think I'm immortal, though. I'm 82, but I have a great sense of mortality. I've always been very concerned about color because the way that different colors have decay from the retina at different rates, and you have to be very careful about it. How you, in a film, that you're not overloading the audience with color that distracts from the story and the compositions. In Zardoz, in Point Blank, it was a monotone. Each scene was all in a single color. In terms of Zardoz, Geoffrey Unsworth had devised this method of color photography, which was, you see, up until Geoffrey, really, cameramen had lit color in the same way as they lit black and white, which is where you use light to differentiate the different planes. And Geoffrey revolutionized it by shooting this with soft reflected light, allowing the colors to separate the planes. And he used a certain amount of diffusion, and it was very complicated the way he did it, and very difficult to achieve. But what it gave you was a kind of pastel-y set of colors, which were soft and easy on the eye, very beautiful. When I was in America, I was promoting my film Queen and Country, and I was addressing different groups, and every time Zardoz was mentioned, there would be applause. This perplexed me, and my perplexity was increased when 20th Century Fox called me and said they were going to restore it. And I said, well, why are you doing that? They said, well, there's a great deal of interest in this film now. And it seemed to me, anyway, that if you projected the current situation of the world and projected it forward with all the innovations of technology, with better medicine, that you would reach the same conclusion that I came to. And that's what I put on the screen.